Hello, I'm Dr. Lewis Hoffman of Saybrook University. This video lecture is on my approach to grading and providing feedback. I'm developing this primarily for students at Saybrook University that take courses with me. However, I hope it may be helpful for some others as well. My intent with this video is to help students better understand and utilize the feedback that I offer, and also provide a frame of reference that may help for students to excel in classes that they take with me. As an overview of what we'll cover in this lecture, I'm going to talk about my values in grading papers, what I emphasize when grading, why it's important to use feedback, my approach to each paper that I grade, the understanding the feedback, and then my approach to providing feedback in a progressive manner. My values in grading. I view the primary purpose of grading papers to help students grow and prepare for academic and professional success. It is part of the mentoring process in my view. I don't see grading papers and providing feedback on papers as evaluating. It is rather part of the mentoring process. That is the primary purpose of providing feedback on papers. If you're in the field of psychology, communication is going to be a vital aspect of what you do, both written and oral. You're going to need to use writing to communicate with people effectively. And it's important to be able to communicate clearly and within the standards of the field. You're also going to need to communicate well orally. And while oral communication and written communication are different mediums, if you improve your written communication, it's likely to also benefit your ability to communicate orally. So I see this as a very central part of becoming a professional in psychology, and I take it very seriously. And I also see it as part of the growth process more than the evaluation process. It is not something that I view as something I need to just check off my to-do list. Rather, it is something that is an essential part of the learning. I do believe it's important that professors provide feedback on the mechanics of writing, which includes things like grammar, APA style, and other technical aspects of the writing. Preparing to write at the professional level is an important part of graduate school, or if you're in undergraduate or the master's level, preparing to write at the next level of your academic journey. And so mastering these mechanics is very important. And I see it as a responsibility of professors to help you improve. However, the primary responsibility on these falls on the students. That if you've made it into graduate school, you really should be able to master most of these mechanics. And you're going to benefit greatly by trying to master them early on in the process. This will allow you to focus more on the content and the other aspects of your academic journey. If you don't master these, what you're going to find is that you're not prepared for your essays and your thesis and dissertation, and you're spending a lot of time going back, editing your papers, and making corrections on these foundational mechanics of writing. It also helps you to become prepared for your career. I do believe that in particular, if you can master these early on, it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time as well as a tremendous amount of stress. So this is important. But this should be something that you don't need a lot of feedback on to make the improvements and corrections. You should not have to have professors repeatedly telling you how to correctly cite across different papers, or how to do a reference section correctly in APA style across different papers, or how to use punctuation in APA style. You should be able to get this feedback, incorporate it, and master it fairly quickly. The development and organization of ideas. This is a little bit of a higher level of feedback, and this is where you want to be focusing on fairly early in your program. If you don't have the mechanics down, it's much harder to focus on this level of writing. Good ideas will not come through unless the ideas are well developed. This includes the organization of the idea, the clarity of the idea, the transitioning between ideas, and supporting your ideas with the scholarly literature. So there are many aspects of the organization and development of ideas. And part of this is going to be connected to kind of the outline of your paper and how ideas are connected. The presentation of it, in other words. And headings are very important to this. And I strongly recommend that students utilize headings when writing papers. I don't, as of yet, require it, though I have been considering requiring using headings in papers for some time. The primary reason for this is I've noticed increasingly over time that when papers don't use headings, it is much, much more likely that students are going to have to rewrite their papers because the quality is just not as strong. Now, I don't think it's the headings necessarily that make them strong, but the process of utilizing headings. That changes the way that you think about writing and organizing your paper. So headings are quite critical, and the organization and development of ideas is quite critical. Now, this is something that you should have some ability to do already when you enter graduate school. However, it is something more than the mechanics that we would expect that you're still working on, particularly doing these things at a graduate or professional level. And when you're in a master's or doctorate program, the goal is really that when you graduate from the program, you're writing at a professional level. And so that is your target that you're working towards. And while you may not be quite at the professional level in the development of organization of ideas when you enter a graduate program, you should be progressing on that. And then critical thinking is very important. I'm not going to talk about critical thinking in this lecture. I do have another video lecture on critical thinking and scholarly writing that would encourage you to watch if this is something that you need guidance with at all. And then the content. Now, the content is largely dependent upon these previously discussed issues. If your mechanics aren't good, if your organization is not good, if your development of ideas are not good, then your content is not going to come through. So your content cannot shine. It cannot really show itself. Your ideas can't really show themselves unless you've worked on these other foundations. Now, the content includes your ideas, but more importantly, it includes your ideas supported by the scholarly literature. And it is always better to present ideas supported by the scholarly literature than just putting them out there as your ideas. Now, some people feel that when they cite sources to support the ideas, then it diminishes them as being your own idea. But even great ideas hold less weight if they're not engaging the scholarly literature. So it is better to support your ideas, engage the scholarly literature. It shows you're aware of what's out there, and it strengthens your ideas because you're supporting it with what has been peer-reviewed in the professional community. And then content also means drawing from good resources. Your content is stronger when it's built upon good scholarly resources. I'm working on another video lecture that should be out shortly after this one on identifying and using scholarly resources. If you struggle with this, I would encourage you to watch that as well. But using important and established scholars and sources relevant to the topic strengthens your content as well. For example, if you're writing a paper on existential humanistic psychology, I'm going to look at some of the most influential people in that field, such as Rolla May, Kirk Schneider, Jim Bugenthal, Myrtle Heery, and others are cited in there. Not necessarily all of them, particularly depending on the particular bent that you're taking on existential humanistic psychology. But I want to see that the most important scholars in that area are recognized. And this is one of the skills of becoming a good scholar and academic and good writer, is being able to identify and recognize what are the important sources to include. So the content is also an important part that I pay attention to in grading. Well, with that content, I also would say that if it's when you're early in the program, I don't expect for you to have as broad of an understanding of the important contributions to the field. But as you move along in the program, again, I'm going to have greater expectations about being able to work with topics, having a deeper understanding of the important figures in that particular area. Now, what I emphasize when grading, it's very important to show that you're making an effort. And there's a few things that I look at that are often key pointers towards this. One is the APA style, and then also is it proofread. If I read through a paper and there's a lot of typos, there's a lot of misspelled words, there's a lot of grammar problems, there's a lot of sentences where it's obvious you just didn't read back through it, that shows me that you didn't make much of an effort. When I go to the reference section and I see that the references, all of them have errors in them, and it's evident that you did not try to look up how to put your references in correct APA style. That again shows me that you didn't make much of an effort. Now, one of the things that signals to me as a professor is that you're not really respecting my time. That when you are are not taking the time to read back through and to try and follow the instructions on the assignment as far as APA style and proofreading, it shows that you're not respecting my time that I have to put in grading your paper. So this is very important to do. And then showing that you understand the purpose of the assignment. Still, I find at the graduate level it is common that once or twice a semester I'll receive papers where it just appears that the student didn't read the purpose of the assignment, didn't read the syllabus. If it's not clear, ask. It is so much more enjoyable to answer questions about, to clarify assignment rather than to get a paper and realize that this really wasn't what was being asked for and having to write a revision. This doesn't respect your time and it doesn't respect my time. It's much better to take the time to ask in advance, and I'm always open to clarifying assignments. Showing improvement and progress. And this is about using feedback. It's connected to the openness to feedback, but the openness is really that receptivity. And the openness to feedback, it really shows the desire to want to learn and grow. And showing improvement and progress is also shows that you want to learn and grow and become a better scholar, and also better professional. When you don't show improvement and progress, that once again it's disrespecting the time that professors put in. As a professor, I spend more time grading papers than any other task that I do in my professional career. That's the number one time consumer of my time. And I take it seriously, and I really try to provide the feedback that's going to help people grow. When I take time to provide feedback and then I see the next paper and recognize that the corrections are not carried forward, that the feedback is not utilized in that next paper that you write, that shows that you are not respecting the time and effort that I put in to trying to help you grow as a student. And so this is one of the things that I would say is the most frustrating things that professors deal with, is when feedback is not utilized. And it is something that they will definitely note. Why using feedback is important? Even if it's your last paper and you passed it, it is important to carefully review the feedback. If you're committed to growing and getting better, you should really want to do this. Not just look, oh, did I pass? But look at that feedback. There are going to, again, be higher expectations for your writing as you progress through a program. And so this feedback will help you succeed there. And professors do notice across classes whether you've used the feedback. So if I have you at class first year, and then I have you another class at the end of your second year, and I see you're making those same mistakes, then again, I recognize that you've not used this feedback. Other reasons it's important to use the feedback, well, the most obvious is just to improve your writing. If you're in school, particularly graduate school, you should want to improve your writing. That should be part of your commitment because it's going to be part of what you need to do as a professional. So that's the most basic, and that by itself should be enough. Expected growth on future papers within a course and between courses. And again, we do notice between courses whether you're making improvement. Something that I strongly recommend is to review feedback from previous papers before starting writing your next paper. So when you sit down to write, you want to go back and look through and see what are the things that the professor suggested I should improve upon. Now, even if this is the next semester and different professor, I would encourage you to do this. This is one of the best ways to really improve your writing. As someone that has been writing for some time, I've served as editors for journals, I have edited books, I have edited books for peers, published fairly extensively myself. There still are always things that I'm working on with my writing, always. And I generally have a list of things either written down or in my head of the things that I'm focusing on improving in my writing at a particular time. And this is something that I imagine I'll be doing throughout my career. And it's something that I would encourage you to think about doing, is always having those few things that you're working on. You're never going to be a perfect writer. You're never going to have everything right. There's always going to be some typos and mistakes unless it's very unusual situations. As a matter of fact, I often tell the story that I have once in my career submitted a paper that got through the peer review process and also the copy editing process, and there were no changes to it. And when that happened, the editor sent me something and said, I just want you to know that that your paper had no edits to it needed at all, either copy editing or content. And I really want you to know that's incredibly rare that ever happens. And so it's a really unusual situation for that to happen, even if you're an accomplished scholarly writer with many books and journal articles. There's always going to be some things in there, and we typically are not as good at editing our own work as others. But yet we can always be working on things, and my goal is always for there to be less and less of those things as I progress in my writing. But still, as a fairly accomplished writer and someone that's pretty good at the mechanics of writing, every time I get copy editing back, there are a few changes to it. That's normal, but you want to be showing that improvement. In a class, when there are two or three papers in a course, what I do as a professor is I review the feedback on the previous paper before grading the subsequent one. And if it's evident the feedback is not used, I will typically stop grading, return the paper, and ask for a revision before I finish grading. Now, as a student, I imagine that this is very frustrating when sometimes it may be about minor things. For example, I have had students go back and make corrections on the comma before and in a paper. That if in APA style, which is different than some other styles, in strings of 3 or more, you have a comma before and or comma before or. This is different than some other styles. Now, this is a minor thing. And to go back and do it on a paper, a 10, 15 page paper, it's not going to take you too long to do that. But hopefully it'll ingrain the process in you. But now if you get to your dissertation, or your dissertation proposal, and you've got 80 pages, and you have to go back and correct that, that's going to take a while, and it's going to be frustrating for you. And it's going to be frustrating for the professor as well. So part of this, in asking you to revise on these things, is to emphasize the importance of utilizing the feedback. It's also to help learn, but it's also to save you time in the long run. It takes you less time to rewrite a paper now than to be making major edits on a huge paper later. So I do emphasize those. And now when grading, I often will have more leniency on a first paper. And if it's things that I feel like you can incorporate the feedback and make changes in the subsequent paper in the course, I may not ask for a revision on a paper that I otherwise would ask for a revision for. But you need to incorporate it in the second paper. But if there's more than one paper due in a course, it's important to know that I'm always going to have higher expectations on that second paper. And I'm always going to expect that the things that I provided feedback on the first paper are going to show improvement on the second paper, particularly on the things that are foundational mechanics. Those I should see significant improvement on. So it's important, very important to use that feedback. It's going to save you a lot of time, and it's going to save professors a lot of times. It also is going to reflect well upon you if you're able to do this. A thing I would also add just about Saybrook in general, many of you likely know this already if watching this video, but it's part of our pedagogy at Saybrook that students often are going to have to revise papers. This is not a way of saying that you failed the paper. This is part of our mentoring and teaching process at Saybrook, is to write and rewrite papers. And so very few students are going to make it through the program without having to rewrite some papers and courses. And when you get to your essay and dissertation, there's always going to be, I've never heard of a situation where there's not going to be some rewrites on those. So if you are asked to rewrite a paper, don't take that too critically, don't be too hard on yourself about that, but use it as an opportunity to really improve your writing. And again, if you use these opportunities well, it is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Then using feedback, it's also important for the future. Professors notice this across courses. Professors tend to grade more strictly the closer you get to the end of the program. I tend to be a little more strict in my feedback if you're in your third year versus first year in the program. Showing that you use feedback can impact things like letters of recommendation, willingness to serve on or chair your essays, thesis, or dissertation. If a student has taken a couple classes with me and it's obvious they're not using the feedback, and then they ask me to be a chair of their dissertation or serve on their dissertation, I'm going to be hesitant to do that because you've not used the feedback that I've offered. And so it's not about, when we're talking about content, it's never about agreeing with the professor, but it's about, are you able to use the feedback to improve and strengthen your writing skills and abilities and strengthen your understanding of the content. So these are something that's very important. It also reflects something that's reflected often in letters of recommendation. Using feedback reflects to the professors an openness to learning and commitment to improvement. These are things that future employers value. So I like to be able to put in letters of recommendation that you are open to feedback and that you're committed to ongoing improvement and ongoing learning. And if you do a good job of utilizing the feedback, I generally put that in there. And as someone that's been on that hiring side in many different contexts, that's something that I always like to see. That people that think they have achieved where they need to be, they're often some of the people that are the most difficult to work with, and also often people that are not quite as good at their job. People that recognize that they're continually in a growth process often are more skilled, are more effective in what they do, and they will also continue to become stronger in those over time. So this is something that is noticed by professors, and it can impact things down the line. My approach to each paper. Now there's a process that I typically take, not always, but typically take, particularly if it's the first or second time that I've graded a paper by a particular student. The first thing that I will typically do is review the references. And there's several things that I'm looking at there. As I noted before, one, I'm going to look, are they in APA style? If they're not in APA style, that is something that is going to really register with me that, again, you haven't put forth the effort to try and do your best work. I'm going to look, are they scholarly sources? That's really important. I'm working on another video lecture that should be out shortly after this on scholarly sources, that if that's not clear to you, would encourage you to look at. Have you identified important papers and scholars to cite? I've mentioned that a little bit before. The breadth of the references. And again, the further you go through the program, the more we're going to expect there to be a good breadth of references around the topic. And do the references fit your topic? Now, sometimes what we'll start to see is that you're stretching references to make them fit that aren't necessarily the best fit. And that's often done when people don't want to go into the scholarly literature and find more appropriate resources. So looking at the references tells me quite a bit right at that point. So you really want to pay attention and do your best with your reference section. The second thing I do is I skim the paper. And there's a few things I look at. Were headings appropriately used, and are they consistent with APA style? Consistent with APA style, again, that tells me, did you take the time to look them up in the style manual and see the correct way to do these? Looking at the headings does give me a sense, is there a logical progression of your topic? And again, I find often when there's not headings, there's not a logical progression of your topic. So headings often help for that, to help guide the writer to be able to do that better. Are your citations used and placed correctly? So if I see all of your citations are generally at the end of the paragraph, then I start to recognize, all right, not aware that citations are supposed to be used after the first time you refer to a source within a paragraph. If the citations are not in correct APA style, that again stands out to me. If I see 2 paragraphs in a row and there's no citations, then I'm starting to see you're not backing up your ideas with scholarly sources. And the more that, further along in the program that you get, I'm going to want to really see that your references are integrated. There's a lot more information about integrating references on the video lecture on critical thinking and scholarly writing that I did that's available on YouTube and at academia.edu. Third, I read the paper. And so by looking at the references and skimming, that provides me with a good frame of reference as I go through the paper. And what I found through many years of grading hundreds and hundreds of paper, there's often a strong correlation to what I see in looking at the references and skimming the paper and what I find as I start going through the paper. Understanding the feedback. When I give feedback, I use the track changes and review function on Microsoft Word to grade. And with these features, I can grade by editing as well as commenting. So what I will often do is illustrate things by editing them. I will show certain types of mistakes just by doing the editing and not necessarily commenting, particularly if it's just an occasional mistake. With grammar, APA style, I often just correct. You'll see some of this in the upcoming slides. And if it's a repeated problem, then I'll comment on it. Or if it's a complex problem, I'll comment upon it. But some of the feedback I will give is just by making the corrections and without a comment. At the graduate level, particularly on foundational mechanics things, you should be able to interpret based on the changes how it should be done, or be able to look at the changes and then look up in the APA style manual to see how it should be done correctly. And I do, particularly with those more foundational things, again, I put more of the burden of responsibility about that on students. I want to alert you to the mistakes when I see them, but you should be able to take the primary responsibility in understanding and correcting them. Okay, so here's one example. I'm just showing one particular thing on this slide, and then we'll show some more on the next. So if you look here, the word identified was misspelled. Now, in Microsoft or in PCs, I believe you right-click on the word, and it'll bring up the suggestions. And in Apple, it is a Control and the click, and it'll bring up the suggestion. And for misspelled words, I'll often correct them by doing this. And then when you get to this next slide here, you'll see this word is changed with, oh, I didn't do it on here. But what you'll see is this word will be all red, and over here it'll say deleted. Now sometimes that's confusing because it looks like the same word if you don't look closely there. But if you see what looks like the same word, it probably was a misspelling. At the graduate level, hopefully there's not very many of these. Now let's just go down through this page, and I'll show you several examples of what you will see in grading. Now first thing you should notice is over here where there's lines, this means that there is a correction when there's a line over here. Sometimes the corrections might be small and you might not notice the red. For example, it's adding a comma. So look at these over here. That's important in recognizing what the correction is. Now here is an example. And what I've done here is I've taken a paper that I wrote before. I added some mistakes to them in order to illustrate. So this is one of my own papers here. I corrected this. If it was many existential therapists has provided. In that situation, what I'm probably going to do is just correct the grammar. And so what you see is the deleted S from has and the added HVE. Again, for grammar changes like that, you should be able to recognize the mistake just by the correction there. Now here, you'll often see things like this in papers, where it's deleted, but it doesn't seem to show what's deleted. Now, what had happened here is there were 4 spaces here instead of the 1. Now, APA style uses 2 spaces behind a period in the new APA style. Saybrook does a variation of that and uses the 1, which is consistent with the previous APA style. You'll find that journals often do that, and different programs will use slight variations of APA style at times. But so here there's 4. And so I deleted those extra spaces, and it's just going to show the deleted. So if you see deleted without anything behind it, what that's probably suggesting is that there are some spaces missed there, extra spaces that should have been deleted. Now if you just see one of those, probably just an accident that we all make sometimes. But if you notice a lot of these, what that's really showing is that you need to do a more careful job at looking through and seeing if your spacing is accurate. Now sometimes what I will do is add a sentence or two. Particularly I do this quite frequently to clarify a transition, or to illustrate something, or to illustrate how to illustrate a point. When I add a sentence, I typically will always put something over here to comment why I did that. So I added this sentence to illustrate how you could do a better transition between these 2 topics. So, sometimes I'll just say, you need a better transition here. But if I'm noticing that this is a problem that you seem to struggle with, what I might do is provide some illustrations. So when I see certain types of writing problems once or twice, I might just comment on them, use a better transition here, etc. If I start to start to think that, well, maybe you don't understand how to do this so well, then I'm going to try and provide some examples. So again, this is gauging the level of feedback to what may be necessary in the situation. Now here, what I corrected here and you'd see was originally it was Schneider, comma, 2007, not in parentheses, and Yalom. So there was a mistake in the citation. So what I did is deleted the comma, which appears over here, added the parentheses, which are going to show up in red, similar to what was up above. And so you might see some things like that, correcting the APA style. Again, on those, I'm typically not going to comment. What you should do when you see those is if it's not clear what the mistake was or what you should have done, the first thing you should do is look up in the APA style manual the correct way to do that particular thing. In this situation, a citation. If you still don't understand, then email me. But you're a graduate student, you should take the first responsibility for trying to figure that out yourself, going to the style manual if it's not evident just by the correction. But hopefully most of the time on something like this, just by the correction, it's going to be evident. But again, you need to be responsible for learning how to make those changes. And then here on this last one, what I did is I removed the original language and put it in there and then showed how it would correct. So the original, so if the sentence was, Wampel thinks existential psychology is a good approach. Now that's not a very strong statement. It's not very clear. It's not the most scholarly tone. Wampel thinks. And so change that with Wampel offers an endorsement of existential therapy, noting that it can provide an ideal foundation for integrating various approaches to therapy. Okay, so this is a stronger statement. Now when I do this, I'm typically going to provide a comment on it. Sometimes if I've commented on a couple times, I might just make that change to give you another example. But somewhere I probably have commented on that. But if you have this, if you see this and it's not clear why I made the change, again, that's a good thing to email me about or contact me. Okay, this is just an illustration. I've mentioned a couple times, strings of 3 or more in APA style, you have a comma before the or you have a comma before the and in these. If it's a string of 2, you do not necessarily have that. It depends upon the situation. But in the strings of 3 or more, it is something that you should be able to master pretty quickly. So a lot of times I'll just add the comma in there, and what you'll see again is this line over here. Easy to miss this here if you don't notice the line there. That is a really small period there, and that line there is actually, I think, just because the cursor was over it. So it's more difficult to notice than what it is here without paying attention to that line. Now, on things of 3 or more, often I'm just going to comment on. If I see that as a really regular pattern, then I'm probably going to make a comment that in APA style, in strings of 3 or more, put the comma before the and or the or. Anytime you do not understand why I did a change or anything else about the feedback, please email me to clarify. You can also ask for an appointment to talk through any of the questions. I generally will set these up as 15 or 30-minute appointments, but I'm always happy to talk through questions about the feedbacks. I do want you to utilize it. I put the time in to put it there. I want it to be able to be put to good use. And if you need to discuss that with me in order to do that, please let me know. Don't hesitate to do that. And I'm happy to set up times to talk about it. One thing that I'll often do with unnecessary words is just delete them. Again, I'm not going to always comment on that. I might comment on it the first time and not do it after that. But what I want you to do is recognize the different places. In this example, if the sentence was in many very important ways, well, that very important is really not necessary. That's just adding some language that's not stating much more. So just in many ways, just deleted it there. So when you see that, just the deletions like that, one of the first things to ask Jimmy is, were those words necessary? I typically try to give feedback the first 3 to 4 times I see an error, but then I stop. I'm not going to, if you have a paper and there's 30 instances of strings of 3 or more without an and, or if there's 30 citations where you don't put a comma between the scholar and the date, I'm not going to make the correction on all of those. I generally make it the first 3 or 4 times and then stop. Now, I spend so much time grading and editing that often I continue to do it some just out of habit. But I'm not, my goal is to try and stop, but sometimes in autopilot I continue to do it. So when you see that, if you see something 3 to 4 times, you should recognize that it's a pattern that you do and you need to watch for it. If you're asked to revise the paper, then you're responsible for locating and correcting the other instances of it. I shouldn't have to point out every one. If I point it out 3 or 4 times, you should be able to make the other corrections on that. And again, that's part of your taking responsibility for learning this and making the corrections. So not all errors of a particular type are going to be corrected, typically in a paper. I will often provide links in the comments or at the end of a section or end of the paper to guides for common mistakes. For example, I'll often link to videos I have developed about a particular error and suggest that you might watch those. I will frequently provide links to Grammar Girl or similar websites for common grammar errors. For example, a very frequent mistake is not knowing when to use that and which. That's something that I used to struggle with, and it was regular when I'd get copy edits back on a journal article or something that there would be corrections to that and which. And so it is a common mistake. And when I see that mistake being made multiple times, I'll often just put the link in the Grammar Girl. With that, it's often easier to get an understanding of why you use it the way it is in order to correct the change. So if getting that understanding of something to more deeply understand it will help to address the problem, then I'm generally going to suggest a site like that. Similarly, if I see some difficulty using APA style correct, I'll often cite the page on the Purdue OWL Writing Lab, which is a great resource, and just send you the link for that so you can look up the correct way to do it. If you don't know how to cite edited book chapter, for example, or chapter in an edited book, then I'll often send you to the Purdue OWL Writing Lab to look up the correct way to do it. So when I put those links in, I would strongly encourage you to generally to go to them and get that understanding. Again, getting the understanding is going to help you make the change, so it's not just rote memory, but understanding why it is the way it is. When we get to the end of the paper, then, I try to offer feedback in a progressive manner. What I mean by this is I try to, 1, direct it to where you're at, and 2, emphasize things that I think are priorities and things that you might want to work on after you get the priorities mastered. So at the end of the paper, I provide a summary that includes 1 to 3 components. Now there's always going to be a general reflection on the paper, which may include some suggestions for future reading or ideas to consider. Sometimes, a couple times on really strong papers, I've said, hey, you might want to incorporate some of the feedback here and submit it for a journal article. And at least a couple students have done that and got their class papers published by using the feedback and strengthening them and submitting them. So that may be something that would be included in this first part. That's always going to be there. Typically, particularly if you're early in the program, there will also be some areas that I would recommend for you to focus on in improving your writing. These might be the things that you just kind of keep in your mind. And then there might be a section on areas that are necessary to improve upon, either for revision if it's required, or for your next paper, or just for future writing. So if I'm going to have you do a revision, I'm not necessarily going to say you have to address all of the feedback in there to get to a passing level. But what I will do is I will be very clear and specific. These are the things that you must address for it to be passing. And that's generally going to be 3 to 6 things that you're going to have to do. I try to keep it closer to 3 most of the time, but if the paper really is in rough shape, it might be up to 6. But I don't think I've ever gone over 6, or pretty rarely have I gone over 6 for that. You generally are going to be able to improve more if you're focusing on certain aspects of it. But when I do that, I also want you to keep in mind these other things. So what I might do is these are the things you must do, and then after that. And so the 2 and 3 here would be reversed if all 3 of them are included. Often it might just be the first 2, but if all 3 are included, 3 will come before 2. So then I'll put the things, these you must do, and then these are the things to keep in mind as you master the things you must do. These are some more aspirational things that are going to be important for you to work on by the time you get to your thesis or essays or dissertations. So again, the purpose of this is to try and help give you the feedback and guidance on what's going to be most important for you and most helpful for you to focus on at a particular time. You will often do better at improving your writing if focusing on a few issues at a time. If there are 10 things that are going to be really important for you to improve upon by the time you get to your thesis or essays, it's going to be hard to manage that if you're doing all of those at once. So you might pick 5. I'm going to really focus on these. Once I get those down, I'm going to really focus on the next 5. I try to gauge my feedback to where you're at in your writing and also where you are at in the program. If you're far along in the program and there's still quite a few issues, I might say that there are more things that are really important for you to focus on. And again, that's to make sure that you're ready by the time you get to your thesis or essays or dissertation. But I'm going to try and emphasize on improving your writing based on where you're at as the writer. If you're a strong technical writer, feedback will be mostly focused on content and maybe some of that organization and development. And your goal should be to get to this place by the end of the first year, or certainly the first year and a half of your program for most students. That's what I would set up for a goal. If you've made it into graduate school, you should be able to master those mechanics of writing through the first year. Ideally, you have them mastered when you come in. But if not, you should be able to get those mastered by the end of your first year. If you can do that, you're going to be able to focus much more on your content and your higher level aspects of your writing, which is going to help for you to excel. And those are going to help for you to be able to get to your dissertation more. So that first year, often I find students, they're working on their mechanics, organization, and development as primary things, but the content is also important. As you gain a stronger background in the content in the field, and as you strengthen these others, then you shift to where you're focusing more, not so much on mechanics because they're mastered, you're focusing more on your organization and development and your content. As you get those mastered, then you're focusing primarily on your content, which is where you want to be by the time you get to your thesis or essays or dissertation. Hopefully, by that time, there's very little feedback on your mechanics of your writing. There shouldn't be much feedback on the mechanics of your writing at that point. Again, we're all going to make some mistakes that, as an accomplished writer, most of us are still going to have some things that are needed in copy editing. That's common. You're not going to be perfect, but there should be very few of those by the time you get to your thesis, essays, and dissertation. So that's kind of a way of thinking about your content. Now, if you come into the program really strong in mechanics, that puts you so much further ahead on being able to focus on that organization, development, and content, and really strengthen your writing to be able to get to that place where you excel at scholarly and professional writing. Okay. There are some additional writing videos that are already available and that I'm developing on the Lewis Hoffman PhD YouTube channel, and these are also linked to on the academia.edu under teaching videos, and will also be on my linked to on my teaching website. So I would encourage you to take a look at these if there's particular areas you're struggling with, and see if some of these videos may be helpful for you. So I hope this video was helpful in preparing you to do very well in the class and to be able to better utilize the feedback that I may offer. Thank you.